Hi, my name's Gary. I've been selling inflatable paddleboards now for over 13 years. I've been in the water sports industry for 30 years, or over 30 years I should say. Today we're going to be talking to you about paddleboards, specifically the construction of paddleboards. So we're basically going to take the con out of construction because there's a lot of miscommunication out there on paddleboards. So we're going to talk to you about the drop stitch, the rails, thickness of paddleboards, the length of paddleboards, and just get you out there on the water with something you can really enjoy. Drop stitch. What is drop stitch? You've most probably heard this terminology. It's pretty much the core of your paddleboard. This is drop stitch here. Thousands of threads joining the top and bottom together. So drop stitch was originally designed for gymnastics mats. It was a low density material on a low grade substrate. So basically you put the air in and it was slightly spongy and you didn't hurt yourself doing gymnastics. Paddleboards need to be much more rigid than that. So we need to make sure that this is stiffer, lighter and can take more pressure. So we have two styles of drop stitch. We have fusion drop stitch and we have machine weave drop stitch. Now, to not always confuse people this is the drop stitch part, but it's also super important to know what this drop stitch is connected to. So it's what we call a substrate. You'll see this substrate here is very closely knit. It's actually also fairly thick in thickness. So that means the board can take a large amount of pressure without pulling the strands off. Machine weave is very, very similar, but the machine actually weaves the knit on the top. That machine weave is tighter, so again it's stronger, it's lighter because it's thinner. The strands within the board are also more stiff, so everything on this board becomes stiffer and lighter again. That's the core of your paddleboard. The strands and the substrate all combined into one, making your board rigid and stiff. You have a board that's lower density drop stitch, lower density core of the substrate. You can't get the pressure in it. There's more movement of air, more unbalancement of the board. PVC layers. So we've talked about the drop stitch, now we need to talk about the layers of PVC on your board. So if we go right back to the beginning, when they invented the inflatable paddleboard, this material, as we've talked about drop stitch, was only available with a single layer of PVC bonded to that substrate. Now to make the paddleboard stiff at that time, I had to physically glue a second layer of PVC onto the board. Made the boards amazingly stiff, but it made them heavy, and there was also quite a high chance of having some sort of manufacturing defect with a bubble or something like that. So quickly we had to move on to fused double layer PVC. So the older style boards are very, very heavy, and when you hear companies now saying their boards are 20% lighter, what they're really referring to is that old technology that's now 10 years old. Hasn't been used for a long time. So most paddleboards, the way they're made, they should weigh very similar amounts. So if you have a double laminated PVC board with a high density drop stitch, with a decent rail edge construction, they'll all weigh about the same. They might vary slightly for the thickness of the pad or how many handles you've got on them, but actually that's it. The only really way to make paddleboards lighter is to start removing the quality of the threads, the thickness of the substrate, or how many layers of PVC you have. So if you go back to single skin, that board is then lighter, but it's also not as rigid. By removing fibres, by removing skin, by removing substrate, that board is then lighter. So the most efficient way to make a paddleboard is to have a double laminated fusion technology. It's called many things, to be fair, fusion. It's two layers of PVC fused together before making the board. There's all sorts of exo weaves and I can't remember many of them today, but there is just so many. It's all the same, so don't get sucked into the hype. Obviously, you can make a paddleboard lighter with using machine weave that we've talked about. That is actually lighter, but it's going to be more expensive. You won't find that in a cheaper paddleboard. It's really used on very few brands at the moment with the premium lighter weight construction or specific needs like lightweight foldable travel boards. So yeah, really it's all about thickness and the skin. Don't get confused by my board's super light. It's either super light because it's very thin, and they're definitely not 20% lighter than how a board should be made, because actually I'll tell you what, a story Emmy always used to tell me was that if you take a jumper and you walk into a shop and you buy two knitted jumpers, they're the same size, the same material, same colour, and you hold one up and one's really light and one's really heavy, you go, okay, that one's got more material in it, that one's got less material in it, because that's the only two things that can be different from those jumpers, and that's the same with paddleboards. Pick up two paddleboards that are the same size, and one has less strands in it, it's going to be lighter, not necessarily better. Rail construction. So we've talked about the threads of a paddleboard and how important they are. Now we're going to talk about the rail, which is actually the edge of your board, and how important this is as well. This is most probably almost as important as the threads inside. It's definitely the second most important part. What we'll do is we'll start about the top way of making a rail construction, the best way, and that is, so you've got your drop stitch, that's all held together nicely, all the pressure's been pulled on. So what you need to do to make a really good premium paddleboard that takes 20 psi pressure, to bring the top and bottom layers around in the middle, and then we glue on one layer of PVC, and then we glue on another layer of PVC. That rail construction then is super solid. Gives you a really nice shape to the board. When you look at your board, you've got a very narrow rail, but no gap in there, so these two layers of PVC can actually be quite narrow. It allows the board to be rigid and take high pressure, up to 26 recommended. Most boards will pump to 20 and have a high rating for expansion in the sun. The second way to make a paddleboard, slightly cheaper, is to take the two layers we've just discussed, bend them in the same way, but you'll leave about an inch gap in between the two layers, and then your two PVC layers are glued across the top. A little bit like the second board on the rail down here. What that does is it still gives you a premium double rail. It's nice and strong, and there's very little PVC exposed to the internal pressure. And then a lot of the cheap brands will just take their PVC, they'll go, there you go, thank you very much, that's our paddleboard, and we'll glue two layers of PVC right across the width of the board. When you do this, there's a huge amount of PVC exposed to the pressure of the board inside. Now, when they first arrive, that's fine, the boards look good, they've got a nice square look to them, well, obviously not a nice C shape like you'll see in these top two boards here. And that PVC is the only thing that's holding all the pressure in. So most of those brands will say 11 to maximum 15 psi because they can't put all that pressure into that material. So we close that up on the premium rails, much stronger to take 20 psi. Now the PVC rails that you glue on, again, they can be one layer, they can be two layers, they could be a very thin PVC, they could be a thick PVC. So the thicker the PVC, the stronger that board's going to be. If you glue two layers of cheap PVC onto that board and then kind of pump it up to 15 psi, expose it to sunshine, go outside on it, jump up and down, there is the potential for that PVC to stretch. When that PVC then stretches, your board becomes misshapen. So it's not the fact that you might buy a paddleboard and that's what it looks like, it turns up, it looks okay, but over time we're noticing these boards degrade much faster than a board with a premium rail. And that is just down to the fact that there is nothing holding it together. It is two pieces of PVC, drop stitch material with two bits of PVC glued across the top. The reason for doing this is pretty much cost. You take this material, it's one of the most expensive parts of making a paddleboard, and if you're going to make a paddleboard, let's say 30 inches wide. So cheap brand, take your board, cut the material to 30 inches wide, stick the rail around it, you've used 30 inches of material. If you take a premium brand, let's say, and it's maybe a 6-inch thick touring board, you're going to need an extra 3 inches of material there, 3 inches of material there, and the same on the other side. That's 12 inches of material in total to make the same width paddleboard. So you're using pretty much a third more material on the board to make a premium rail than you are a cheap board. And that's why they cut the materials down to absolute minimum and rely on cheap PVC to hold it together. So we've already delved into the rail edge, single, double, triple rail edge. So I just want to quickly go over kind of gluing and welding. We could spend far too long on this talking about gluing and welding. The most important thing really is to look at the brand and what they're offering and what they're saying to your board can take. If you've got a premium rail with premium glue, it's going to be an 18 to 20 psi recommended pressure, which means that they're confident with their gluing and their manufacturing techniques. If the board is 10 to 15 psi with a lower grade rail, lower grade glue, it really does just show that the manufacturers are worried about the construction and the kind of quality of the materials and the rail glue as a whole thing really. Pressure is key, it's one of the most important things about paddleboarding. Stiff paddleboards go forwards, they do not bend. How to choose the right size paddleboard for you? What really is crucial about paddleboards is the width and the thickness of a paddleboard. The length is more to do with maneuverability, so we'll start with the important parts. The width of a paddleboard, super important, especially for the shorter riders. Because what we really don't want to see is someone out there on a big, wide, 34, 35 inch wide board, it's maybe 5'2", really sub 5'4", really, leaning over and getting this really wide paddle arc. Just doesn't work. So let's bring the board in, make it narrower, nice 30 inch wide board, means they can get a nice vertical paddle, same as someone who's 6'2" can get a nice vertical paddle stroke on a wider board. Thickness of a paddleboard. Again, this is really crucial for what we class as lighter riders. A lighter rider, we would say, is someone less than 85 kilos. And again, that is because on this lower 4.7-inch profile, there's less volume in the water, in the board. So it's not sitting on top of the water. It's nicely, in lower centre of effort, the board's sitting nicely on the water. You're controlling where the board's going. So again, it's sitting in the water. It's not too over buoyant. We're kind of talking about this and the size and the width of paddleboards based on the fact that you're already bought into a premium paddleboard brand. So it's a minimum of 18 PSI. You know, boards with lower PSI don't perform in the same way. So width is to do with your height, thickness is to do with your weight, and then the length of a paddleboard is really all to do with what you would like to do with it. So a shorter paddleboard, say 10'4", 10'6", is more maneuverable. So, you know, it's very easy to turn. Going to the other extreme, 12'6", is much better for going in a straight line, but slightly harder to turn. Also, what's super important really is the outline of a paddleboard. So when you look at this board here, although it's 10'4" long, but crucially, it's got nice parallel rails. So there's almost like an invisible rectangle here that gives you stability, because that rectangle sits in the water and is planted on the water. It's got nowhere really to rock. You look at the outline of this board, you can see they've tried to make it pointed, thinking that would make it more efficient through the water. Unfortunately, what they've done is they've increased the curve in the rail edge. And then of course, a circle wants to spin more. So anything with more curve doesn't go in a straight line as well. So parallel rails, whether the board is 10'6", 11'6", or 12'6", you really need the parallel shape which will make the board go forwards. So we're just going to wrap up and talk about a few final points on the board. Fin box. This is a US fin box, not United States, universal standard that stands for. It's basically been around on long Malibu surfboards since the early 70s, which pretty much means you can walk into any corner of the earth and find a replacement fin if you were to be on holiday or traveling and lose your fin. It's a very easy fin to put in. You literally slide it in and then it's secured with a fin nut and bolt. That fin is available in many different sizes, from short river fins to long touring fins, so it makes your board very versatile. Some of the manufacturers will have their own clip-in style fins or slide-in fins. You might have seen people on the beach with this one hitting it with a mallet because it's got stuck with sand. Again, it's not something that we recommend, because if you lose them on holiday, you just don't want to be finding a shop that doesn't have any fins for you. Price of a paddleboard. That's a really difficult subject to get into, but I'll try and have a go. You can buy premium paddleboards at £1,000. You can also buy premium constructed paddleboards at nearer sort of £400. Price doesn't always include quality. There's plenty of brands out there that are trying to take £600–700 off you, and they're 15 PSI, they're 6 inches thick, they're low density. So please just look at what the board is constructed, watch this video a few times, understand what makes a board premium. It's not just price. You know, you ask yourself, why is it sun shining outside? Why is it the middle of the summer? Why are they half price? It just doesn't make sense. Premium paddleboards are very rarely on sale, and just make sure what we told you is in the paddleboard. Terminology, you'll hear all sorts of things. This board is made of military grade Dropstitch. Well, Dropstitch is purchased by the military? Absolutely. Do they have one specifically made that's bulletproof? No. Military uses all sorts of different grades of PVC and Dropstitch depending on what they want to do with it. So paddleboards are made from PVC. Yes, you can get different qualities, but there isn't an official military grade version of that. PVC. Brands will tell you that their boards have got a coating to make them UV stable. PVC is UV stable on its own. There is no special coating, it's just PVC that works in the sun. Okay, thanks for watching the video. I hope you've learned a lot from this today. We don't like to see it when people say, you know, oh, I don't like paddleboarding, it's not for me, I can't do it. You know, clearly there are people that don't like paddleboarding, you know, sports aren't for everybody all the time, but what we don't like to see is people say, oh yeah, I just can't do it. We believe everybody can paddleboard on the right equipment. So if you're struggling, have a look at what you've learned today, have a look at the equipment you're on. But yeah, thank you very much for watching, and enjoy time on the water.